Imagine your boss can fire you, imprison your family, rewrite the law, command an army, and declare himself divine before lunch. Now imagine he stops sleeping. He becomes suspicious of ordinary conversations. He changes decisions without warning. He humiliates advisors, rewards flatterers, and begins treating disagreement as evidence of treason. In a modern government, someone might invoke a constitution, call a doctor, or quietly remove the nuclear codes. In an ancient palace, there might be no legal switch to turn him off. That is the first disturbing answer. When an ancient leader became mentally unstable, the state often did not correct him. The state bent around him. Orders still arrived with seals. Guards still stood outside the door. Priests still performed ceremonies. Tax collectors still collected. From a distance, government looked normal. Inside the palace, reality was being rewritten one terrified conversation at a time. But there is a problem with this story. Ancient historians loved mad kings. A ruler who lost a war, offended the elite, attacked a temple, or died violently could later be described as insane. Madness turned political conflict into a moral fable. The dead ruler became a monster, while the people who replaced him became rescuers. So historians have to ask an uncomfortable question. Was the leader actually mentally ill, physically sick, intoxicated, sleep-deprived, traumatized, poisoned, deliberately theatrical, or simply cruel with unlimited power? Usually, the evidence cannot separate those possibilities cleanly. Caligula is the famous trap. He became Roman emperor in 37 CE and initially received public enthusiasm. Then he suffered a severe illness months into his reign. Later accounts described a ruler who barely slept, spoke with gods, staged humiliations, killed unpredictably, and treated the Senate like a room full of decorative furniture. Suetonius, writing in 121 CE, reported Caligula's insomnia, divine pretensions, and bizarre treatment of elites. He also gave Rome the immortal story of the emperor's favorite horse receiving a marble stable and servants, with Caligula supposedly considering the animal for consul. That sounds like obvious madness. Except Suetonius wrote around 80 years after Caligula died. His account was filled with palace gossip, moral judgment, and stories designed to reveal character through scandal. The horse episode may not show that Caligula believed an animal could govern. It may show that he believed a horse could do the Senate's job just as well. That is not sanity. But it is political contempt, which is different. The court could not diagnose the distinction. It only had to survive it. Courtiers adapted by becoming mirrors. They laughed when the emperor laughed. They condemned whoever he condemned. They watched his face before deciding what they believed. A ruler's instability therefore created something larger than one unstable mind. It created an unstable information system. Bad news stopped moving upward. Flattery moved upward quickly. That matters because paranoia feeds on silence. When honest advisors disappear, the ruler sees fewer contradictions. When frightened officials agree with every suspicion, suspicion begins to look like proof. Every arrest reveals another plot. Every confession extracted under threat confirms the ruler's brilliance. Every terrified pause looks guilty. The palace becomes a machine that manufactures evidence for the leader's fears. You can see the same mechanism in the final years of Herod the Great. Herod was an effective builder, a skilled political survivor, and a ruler whose position depended on Rome, family alliances, military force, and constant vigilance. He also became increasingly consumed by threats inside his own household. Josephus, completing his account in 93 CE, described Herod ordering the execution of his wife Miriam, later killing their sons Alexander and Aristobulus, and finally executing another son, Antipater, shortly before Herod's own death. Was that mental collapse? Maybe partly. Severe illness, pain, fear of succession, and decades of conspiracy could have sharpened genuine paranoia. But Herod also faced real plots. Members of royal families did compete for power. Rome could replace client kings. Sons sometimes did become rivals because monarchy turned family dinner into a job interview with an execution policy. A ruler might look paranoid because ancient courts were dangerous. Assassination was not an irrational fear when several people nearby were actively considering it. Extreme suspicion could even keep a king alive. For a while. Then the survival strategy became the threat. By killing heirs, commanders, relatives, and experienced advisors, the ruler removed the very people capable of maintaining continuity. Everyone near him began planning not for the kingdom's future, but for the moment he died. This was the second common response to an unstable ruler. Factions formed around access. The chamberlain controlled who entered. The physician controlled information about the ruler's body. The general controlled soldiers. The royal spouse controlled private conversation. The heir controlled hope. Whoever could interpret the ruler's words could quietly rule through him. And when the ruler could no longer speak, the court might keep him speaking anyway. The clearest example comes from the death of China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, in 210 BC. His reign had unified warring states, standardized systems, built enormous projects, punished dissent, and pursued immortality desperately. Sima Qian, whose historical account was completed around 94 BC, described the emperor dying during an imperial journey. Officials concealed the death, kept food delivered to his carriage as if he were alive, and placed carts of foul fish nearby to mask the smell of the decomposing body. They then manipulated the succession before announcing what had happened. Think about that. The emperor was dead, but the machinery of obedience continued. Servants approached the carriage. Messages moved outward. The imperial body traveled home behind a curtain of ceremony and rotting fish. This reveals what happened when a leader became unstable, incapacitated, or unreachable. The palace often protected the appearance of command longer than the person commanding it. Why? Because admitting weakness could trigger rebellion, invasion, succession war, or economic panic. The ruler's body was not private. It was part of the state's infrastructure. If that body failed, officials might hide the failure while they rearranged power behind the screen. Sometimes they used religion. Strange behavior could be presented as divine inspiration, possession, a curse, punishment, or sacred transformation. Sometimes physicians treated the body with herbs, fasting, bathing, bloodletting, sleep, ritual, or substances that could make the condition worse. Sometimes relatives isolated the ruler. Sometimes generals ignored commands. Sometimes everyone obeyed until obedience became more dangerous than treason. Then came removal. Not a medical leave. An assassination, forced suicide, palace coup, fabricated order, or sudden announcement that the gods had chosen someone healthier. Caligula was killed by members of his own guard in 41 C. His death was not simply Rome defeating madness. It was a coalition deciding that the personal risk of keeping him alive had exceeded the personal risk of killing an emperor. That distinction matters. Ancient systems rarely removed unstable leaders because subjects had discovered compassionate mental health care. They removed them when elite survival, military loyalty, succession, and public order aligned at the same moment. Until then, instability could become policy. A sleepless night became an execution. A private fear became a purge. A wounded ego became a war. And the people below might never know whether the ruler was ill, calculating, intoxicated, terrified, or simply discovering that nobody could safely tell him no. Bring that back to the room you imagined. The dangerous part is not only the unstable person behind the door. It is the guards who keep saluting, the advisors who keep agreeing, the officials who translate every impulse into law, and the frightened people who pretend the system is functioning because admitting the truth could destroy them. So what happened when an ancient leader became mentally unstable? First, the palace denied it. Then it adapted to it. Then it exploited it. And only when the illusion became impossible to maintain did someone finally step behind the curtain. Sometimes the ruler was already dead.